Marco from Hong Kong. In Hong Kong, for the last generation,
I'm
you have a choice.
the Republican candidate for governor.
Have sexual relations
and
with
I
that woman.
realized that this is something he is
We're not going to be able to solve our problems if we get distracted by sideshows and carnival barkers.
One Republican, one Democrat, and you discuss the issues that matter in today's local, state, national, and global politics. Hosted by Steve Hickson with co-hosts John Stanberry and Franklin Chansey. This is Backfire.
Welcome back to Backfire with John Stanberry and Franklin Chansey. Good morning, good afternoon, whatever you're listening to this show about.
Good morning, Steve.
Hey, Steve.
Good morning, guys. Well, the storm missed us, didn't it?
Pretty much.
So it seems.
You know, I thought our weather forecasting was better than that this day and time, but
well, now, if you want to know what's going to happen to the glaciers 50 years from now, they can do it. But as far as a storm actually coming in 3 days, they can't. And that makes complete sense.
Well, anyway, it was a good reason to let school out. But anyway, I don't know. Did Chattanooga have worse weather than we had? Somebody told me.
I think North Georgia actually.
North
a few
Georgia
people got hit.
the worst of it, I think. Yeah. Although Chattanooga did the same thing we did, the 2-hour delay in schools.
But now keep in mind, there have been instances where they didn't let school out and weather hit, and there were some pretty tragic outcomes.
I'm not saying anything wrong with that. We have to be careful. I understand. You have to let schools out if there's a chance that it could go. And actually, there was a very good chance that could be really bad yesterday. So they did the right thing. It's I was looking at the city council voted George Poe in as vice mayor, and
that's a big change.
It is a huge change. I don't know
how that was. There a race there? I mean,
no.
So Avery didn't run again.
Well, no, that's not true. You don't really run for that job. It's been appointed. Avery has held the job for 14 years.
So they don't do like the county commission where they actually run and vote?
No, according to Avery in the article, traditionally he was advised it was the oldest member of the council who'd been on the council the longest would be the person who served as vice mayor.
Well, they're all good people. I just, I know there's some feelings hurt there, and I just hate to see them get their feelings hurt. They're all good people. They all do a good job serving our community, and anyway.
Well, I mean, the only thing I would say is, looking at this, he served for 14 out of the last 19 years. Well, if it's always the most senior person, I'm sure 14 years ago he wasn't the most senior person on the council.
Well, you may recall when the government change went over, we had a tremendous amount of turnover in city council, so that may actually not be the case. I'm not sure, but certainly.
Didn't Mitchell Lyle and some of them stay on after the turnover?
Only for about 2 years or so after that. You recall Commissioner Lyle had some health problems that led to him leaving the council.
I see Mitchell Lyle up at Garden Plaza. My mother's up there now, and I think he's probably having the best time of his life right now. He's got this little electric wheelchair with the American flag on the back of it, and he rolls around there about 80 miles an hour everywhere he's going all the time. I saw him outside the other day, and he had his police scanner out, and he was telling me about something going over across town.
Mitchell's always
he was a good public servant.
Good man, a character.
He still is a character. He's got a good attitude, I'll tell you that. But
when I first got elected chairman of the Republican Party, he showed up in my office shortly thereafter with a rug, a front doormat rug that said "Vote Republican," and said he wanted me to have. I've still got that rug, Mitchell.
I see this Valentine's case is back in the news again. They've released this younger guy. Has he been in prison? I mean, over here at our city jail system all these years?
Well, he's been there on these charges for the last 10 months, something like that.
When you say these charges,
he may have had some other involvement in the justice system that had him in custody for a while. But
he's been in jail for other things.
Yeah. Well, I understand that he still had some other things going on from other counties or something like that. But the way I looked at it, it looked like he might have been in our system here ever since that case had happened. So I don't know. Could that possibly be?
Not for that.
Not for this case.
Okay. Well, anyway, that Valentine's murder, it's time for it to either be fixed or go away.
Well, I mean, you've got victims there, and you've got victims' families that feel like they're entitled to some justice, and they don't really feel like they've ever gotten justice.
Well, I mean, I don't know what the issues are. The case has been botched.
The issue is very simple, really. It's whether they can prove that Mr. Younger is the person who did this or not. It's not at all clear that they can. There's some, there are some obvious. A lot of the proof hinges on testimony from sources that may not be very credible.
Now, did one of them actually get convicted? One of them has been convicted, correct? Tart Blair was found innocent.
Of
retrial notwithstanding.
Of that charge, yeah.
So did someone actually get sentenced for the murder?
Yes.
So one of them is in jail?
Yes.
Okay. And did he not cooperate with the rest of them?
No.
Oh, I don't know. That case is a terrible, terrible thing.
It's an awful tragedy for the families. There's no question about that. And John's right. Those families have suffered terribly from
multiple screw-ups, and it's just not an example of the way you want the justice system to work.
Well, it's an example of where authorities probably, in response to the difficulties the families have gone through, probably moved forward on the case when they really didn't have the likelihood of succeeding on it based upon the proof they had available. It's a fact. Whether sometimes we may believe we know what happened in a case, but we can't prove it. And that's likely the case here, I think.
Well, it's been going on a long time, so it seems like they should have been able to formulate something by now. But anyway, the law is the law. Commissions consider the doing its own code creation. Do you think there's
the county commission?
Yeah. I didn't think that there was a snowball chance of anything like that ever happening.
Well, I mean, I'll throw something out here. It's probably a little controversial. One commissioner told me, they said, well, ORBA supports some of these code changes. Well, maybe the commission wants to look at who's in ORBA, because it's the Ocoee Regional Builders Association, but they might want to ask how many builders actually belong and how many people in ORBA are actually the trade people who sell the windows, who sell the if you're a guy and your business sells insulation, you're probably happy for them to increase the code requirement for more insulation, because then you get to sell more insulation. So there's a lot of issues going on here. I know there's been people talked about, inspectors talked about, well, I really like the Ohio building codes. Well, guess what? You can't put the insulation in between the same size rafters down here that they put in Ohio. And the reason we don't put that kind of insulation down here is because the average temperature in Ohio is about 25 degrees lower than it is here. But you get an inspector that goes, well, I just like that. Well, guess what? That bumps up the cost of building a house. And one of two things happen. The builder loses money, or the public has to pay more for the house for insulation that's probably not necessary.
I guess where I'm going with this, John, is these are international building codes. There's some.
Do you know what one of the international building codes is?
Tell me what it is.
Sprinklers in homes. Do you have any idea what it'll cost to put a sprinkler in your home? And the first time you have a grease fire in your kitchen and you soak the entire everything you own in the entire house because the sprinkler system sets off, you think consumers are going to be happy with that?
I understand what you're saying about that, and there's a lot of things going on right now. There's a lot of old buildings downtown you can't do anything to because of the codes.
Right.
Already, so I understand.
I can tell you builders would much rather go build in Hamilton County or in the city of Chattanooga than to build up here.
Now, I've heard the opposite. I've heard Hamilton County.
Well, it used to be that way, but they've improved.
What did they do different?
Well, they try to accommodate the builder. You know, they come in and say, what do you need, instead of here's all the hoops you've got to jump through. Really, it's more of an attitude of government. You know, are you focused on making this work, or are you focused on making sure they know you're the boss and you can screw them over if they don't do what you say?
Well,
it's an attitude of government.
When you say an attitude of government, you talk about more inspections, more fees charged.
Well, a lot of times it's not just that. That's the baseline that a lot of this happens on, but a lot of it's the attitude of the inspectors. And we've got great people here. I'm not really talking about local inspectors per se, but for example, right now, there's a real problem with the Dodd-Frank bill that the feds passed and the appraisers. So, you know, you have to go, the bank requires an appraisal. Well, we've got builders out here who have gotten a house appraised for, let's say they get it appraised for $165,000. They're building off plans. So 2 months later, they're building the exact same house, even in the same neighborhood, and the appraiser comes back and appraises it for $150,000 that time. Well, what do? You know, that's a $15,000 difference for this exact same house in the exact same neighborhood. And when you ask about it, they just shrug and go, well, that's my appraisal. But you're screwed at that point. You can't sell the house because people can't get a loan for a house that's being sold over the value. Dodd-Frank, you can ask builders, you can ask bankers. Dodd-Frank has been a nightmare for the home building association.
Well, it is a response to a horrible abuse that was going on.
The fact that it may have needed a response doesn't mean that was the right response, frankly.
But you didn't. Your example that you gave did not explain in any way how Dodd-Frank changed the value of appraisals.
Because it put all these rules in place that they have to go by. And then that puts people in a position to make decisions. For example, Franklin, the appraisers now, apparently because of Dodd-Frank, if you've got a completely finished basement, you could have a basement with marble floors in it. It doesn't affect the value of your home because they're not supposed to count basements anymore, even finished basements. Well, if you've got a homeowner that's put $60,000 into a finished basement, and when he goes to sell the house, the appraisal doesn't reflect that, he's screwed. And by the way, the fact that it was put in by Dodd and Frank, both of which were found to be, let's just say Dodd especially, was getting basically free loans from the same industry he's supposed to be fixing to buy vacation homes, there's some real problems there.
Franklin, not saying much.
No, I'm just looking back, and I challenge anybody to tell me what I'm saying is wrong. We had a decade where appraisals were coming in at 150% of value of the house. You had people calling bankers and saying, how much do you want it to appraise for? And consequently, we had banks loaning outrageous amounts of money, well above the value of houses. And that led to the collapse of the housing market. That's exactly
that certainly had a lot to do with it, Franklin. But a lot had to do with the fact that bank regulators from the government, the experts, came into town and said, you're not giving enough minority loans in that part of town. We don't care whether they can come up with 20%.
That has nothing
to do.
Go
to Bank of Cleveland and ask them. They will tell you. Regulators came in with push pins and said, you haven't loaned enough in this part of town.
John, explain to me exactly what that has to do with how much money you wait, let me finish.
Well, you ask a
Explain to me what that has to do with how much money you loaned on a house in Anatole.
I'll explain.
It's a load of crap, John. The housing crisis wasn't caused by small, poor houses that were overvalued. It was caused by big ones and middle class ones, and people who were feeling a bubble.
But the people that crammed that down our throat was the goody-good liberal progressives in government.
That had nothing to do with trying to make loans to poor people.
Community Reinvestment Act, Franklin. Look it up.
I think they wanted everybody to have a home.
Community Reinvestment Act. That's all you got to know. The government, once again, government planners, instead of letting the market work it out, government planners stuck their nose in and said, we're not going to let money make the decision as to what kind of loan you make. We're going to let demographics do it. We're going to require you to meet a demographic goal.
You're actually making the argument, John, that
too big to fail?
High rise after high rise of condos in Florida sold to investors at more than they were worth has something to do with black people in Cleveland,
I'm sorry
Tennessee.
you can't understand.
That is the dumbest
I'm
thing
sorry
you've ever
that
said
you
in
can't understand the way business works, Franklin. But
I do understand
once
exactly
you
what
open
you're
a
saying.
door, once the government forces a door open, Franklin,
I understand
everybody
exactly
pours
what you're
through.
saying, John.
Everybody pours through.
Everybody was screwing the system
You're right.
to make
They
an
were.
extra buck, and that's
They
because
were.
the government wanted to help poor people.
It's because the
That
government
is- you've
stuck
gotta
their
be
nose
kidding
into
me.
the market.
That's right.
The government stuck their nose into the market, and just
And-
like Obamacare, unintended consequences, Franklin, because you let a bunch of guys in Washington
Unintended
who never
consequences.
lifted a finger to build a house start telling people how they had to build and sell and finance houses.
God forbid
And
we
it
listen to
created
any more
loop-
Republican ideas like Obamacare.
I don't want to listen to a Republican or Democrat idea out of
Oh,
Washington.
you did when
I
it was
want them
your
to leave
idea.
us alone.
When it was your idea,
By the way,
it was
how's
your
that
baby, and it
Obamacare
was
working out
beautiful.
for you, Franklin?
It's working out great for me.
Double-digit increases in premiums, and we were promised $2,500 reductions in
Actually, John,
premiums.
what you don't want to talk about is the fact that nationwide, any premium increases are substantially lower than were
Actually,
projected.
they're not. They're tracking.
It's also-
I've got it
it's
right
also
here, Franklin.
true, John.
They're tracking exactly where they were, but here's your problem. We were promised a $2,500 per year reduction in
Because
premiums.
you
Did we
aren't-
get it?
you aren't
Did
including the
president
subsidies
said,
in there,
out
are
of
you?
his own mouth.
Are
your
you,
president
John?
said $2,500 per year reduction.
You guys
Did we
couldn't
get
tell
it?
the truth.
Did we get it, Franklin?
If it slapped you in the
$2,500, did we get it? And by the way, did we
Yes,
get it?
many people did,
No, we
John.
didn't, Franklin. I'm sorry, the numbers just don't support you.
Wait till the tax
But by all
returns come
means,
back
just
in, John.
talk emotionally, because we love President Obama, so we don't want to say anything negative about the fact that he overpromised and underdelivered.
Lowest uninsured rate
No, it's
in
not,
30
Franklin.
years.
There's 53 million people uninsured. When we started this thing, there were 49, and you all were going to reduce it to nothing. And there's still the same, if not more.
John, you need to go to some objective
Folks,
sites
you've lost
to get
your
information.
insurance. You're going to pay more out of
Really,
pocket.
John?
And
They've all lost their
we
insurance
didn't.
now.
Yeah, the bulk of the people did. The bulk of the sign-ups, Franklin, were people who already had
The
insurance.
sign-ups were heavier than were projected
I
in the
know.
first year, weren't they, John?
No, actually,
Yes,
they
they
weren't.
were.
We don't know, Franklin, because we didn't get honest numbers. The numbers have been dropping ever since they announced them. By the way, Franklin, I'm sure you'll be happy with this. Good California, good liberal Democrat state, has issued $184 million in contracts with no competitive bidding and no oversight, including millions to a company associated with the agency's executive director. That's
John,
the legacy
if
of
the-
Obamacare.
John, if the eastern sky split open tomorrow, you'd turn on Fox News to find out if it was true.
1 in
No,
4
same
privately
thing-
insured adults say they doubt they could pay for a major unexpected illness or injury in the latest polling. 1 in 4 say this is people with insurance. They can't afford the increased out-of-pockets that these high deductibles Obamacare forced on us. Oh, and by the way, the latest round
They didn't force anything on you.
that most certainly did, frankly, because you
No,
couldn't
you
pay
didn't.
you couldn't pay for everything they required unless you got a high deductible. And by the way, Franklin, I'm sure it's just coincidence that the next round of premium increases will hit after the fall elections.
Well, I'll tell you this much, John. The experience that a lot of people in Cleveland have had, I don't know about California, but in Cleveland, the experience a lot of people has had is that their premiums drop dramatically.
Well, Franklin, here's what I'll tell you. I told you before. Please, please, please have every Democrat in the country run on the success of Obamacare. Please do that.
Oh, it will happen.
No, I think we
Oh,
were
it will
talking
happen.
about
Please.
building codes.
It
here
will
a minute.
happen, as you saw. Two Republican senators come out today and go, it was time for us to stop talking about Obamacare.
All right, okay. I'm starting to get Texas, so we got to call this. I thought we was talking about building codes, and that we're going to take our commissioners and
it's government. And
we're-
government makes everything they touch worse for the most part.
we're going to come up with our
Well,
own
government
local
in
building.
Cleveland is dominated by Republicans, so if
You're
you
right,
don't
Franklin.
like it, you know
you know
who's
what? You're right,
responsible
Franklin.
for it,
I'm
don't
glad
ya?
you pointed that out. And Cleveland, while I fuss about certain things, not too bad. Government in Detroit is populated exclusively by Democrats.
All
So
I'm
folks
saying,
out there,
John, is
if you
if you
like the
don't-
way, if you want Cleveland government, vote Republican. If you want Detroit government, vote Democrat.
I'm just pointing out, John, you shouldn't have anything to complain
Well,
about in
we don't.
Cleveland
We've got pretty
because
low-
there's not a
we've
Democrat
got-
voting for anything
We've got pretty
here.
low
They're
unemployment.
all yours.
We've had new companies come to town. I fuss about
We
things,
have
but
a
all
higher
in all,
unemployment
we've
rate
done
than the
pretty
nation
good.
does, don't
well,
we?
We do,
Don't
Franklin,
we?
but it's down. And if this president wasn't in office, everybody'd have lower unemployment.
All right, I want to go back just a minute. We started talking about building codes, then got into this, but let me just see if I can throw this back into another light. This all started back from Clinton, if I'm not mistaken.
No, it started with Carter.
Okay, Carter.
Carter passed the Community
I remember
Reinvestment
Clinton.
Act.
I can't go back as far as Carter.
And then it sat for a couple of decades, and then Clinton decided to really push the Community Reinvestment Act. And one of the people that were pushing that was Franklin Raines, who ended up being Obama's coordinator for housing under his new administration after the year 2000. Now, Franklin Raines got, I think, what was it, $94 million in bonuses out of Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac as he ran it into the ground. But, of course, it's not a Democrat problem. It's a Republican problem.
Now, I'm going to say something that I hope you can understand, John. But I always took it that Clinton was the instigator of the housing deal because he wanted everybody to have affordable housing and so forth. Everything was changed. The interest rates went down on loans. The appraisals of the mortgage companies started popping up. They were making Fannie Mae and so forth, making these loans so easy. The appraisals were whatever they needed to be to put the loan together. Everything got out of kilter. Okay, America was on fire with building all over it. That's what our economy was just racing. Now then, I will say I think Bush was wrong in not cleaning this up because
Actually,
it was out of
I've had
control.
the quotes a year or two ago. Bush tried to clean it up, and the Democrat Senate wouldn't allow it. Barney Franks in the House and Christopher Dodd, you've actually got Democrats on record when Bush came and said, we need to be looking at this housing industry. We need to look at Fannie Mae. We need to look at Fannie Mac. Actually said, we don't think there's a problem here. We need to leave it alone. John McCain brought legislation forward to correct the problems, and the Democrats voted it down.
Agree or disagree, Franklin?
Disagree.
Well, I'll bring you I've had it here before.
I'm
bring it back.
I'm not disagreeing that this particular vote happened. No. The suggestion that they were trying to fix this problem is absurd.
I'll bring you the quote. Bush talked about the fact that we're building a bubble. He actually talked about it, Franklin, and said we've got to pay attention to it and correct it. And they ignored him. The Democrats ignored him. And then the same Democrats turned around after they got their countrywide $1.4 million no payment loans for their second vacation home. Chris Dodd, the author of the Dodd-Frank Act, after he got his loans, then they cracked down. And the big question for you, Franklin, is, are all the banks that were too big to fail, are they bigger or smaller now?
They're more stable.
They're bigger.
They have higher capital requirements.
They still are even bigger, and they can't be allowed to fail. The whole point was to get the system to where no bank was so big that it couldn't be allowed to fail. Every bank they touched is now bigger than it was before they got involved. That's the legacy of big federal government.
Nobody went to jail.
Nobody went to jail. Matter of fact,
see, there's something
your
you and I would
liberal
agree on.
progressives
Some of them
are
should
mad
have
at
gone to
Obama
jail.
over that. Because
that's right.
Holder,
Some of them should have.
That's what they're fussing about. The legacy of Holder is, yes, he went after some corporations, but he didn't go after a single individual. The too big to fail are even bigger now.
By the way, what's going on with Mr. Holder since he announced his retirement?
Well, Obama's not going to announce
he's
a replacement until after the election. So, in other words, I'm going to screw you, but I don't want to screw you until you've already cast your vote.
I call it his retirement.
Which actually encapsulates John's whole philosophy right there. That's exactly right. He doesn't even know who the nominee will be, but it's already a disaster.
No, it's a
Why?
woman.
Because this president is the one nominated.
We have an idea.
That's exactly.
We have an idea who it's going to be, and she's full of scandal before we even start.
I don't think it's going to get better. Do you, John?
The problem is, and you can go back to time immemorial and look at quotes from leaders all across the world through various civilizations. The bigger you let government get, the more corrupt it gets, and the more aggressive it gets in curtailing the people's liberty.
I've got several things I want to talk about today that I know is going to get things stirred up a little bit. But before we do, and we've got to go to break here in a few minutes, Cleveland State, their numbers are declining. What do in colleges, I was looking across the country. Do you think that is from the cost? What's causing this decline?
I think that's a factor. I think the rise of for-profit learning institutions is a bigger factor. Well, you have online degree programs and things that, frankly, trouble me greatly.
Why?
Because I don't think that they are, in fact, have very high standards in many cases. They're much easier to game the system. It's really what's contributed in large part to a significant amount of the student loan debt that we have now. There's a much larger failure rate for folks who are going through those processes.
Let me see if I want to make sure I understand you. So when people were paying for college out of their own pocket, they were more careful about where they sent their money. But once the government started passing money out, we got a lot of people popping up gaming the system.
What I'm saying,
of course, that's not what you're saying.
Those loan programs were already there.
No, the government is now giving tons of money. The problem is, I'm not disagreeing with you, Franklin, about these. Now, I would look at those and say, instead of saying let's get rid of them, I'd say let's make sure that the standards are better, because I think the more opportunity people have, the more choices people have, the economy, the people out here will make the right decision.
So wait, let me make sure I got this straight. So now you're telling me that you would support the federal government setting standards for education?
Not necessarily.
Well, that's what you just said.
What I said was I would like to find ways. We've done it before without the federal government, Franklin. Trade associations, all kinds of things happen like that without the federal government. My point here is, once the government started giving more and more money away, Pell Grants, all the different loan programs, now Obama has nationalized the student loan system effectively. You can't get a loan except through the government. That's where these universities started really exploding their budgets. And I've said this before. You want an engineering degree? 30 years ago, you went to Tennessee Tech, or you went down to Georgia Tech, or you went to one of the schools that specialized in that. And they may not have had a lot of other programs. I mean, they had other programs, but they didn't have a ton of other programs because that was what they specialized in. Once all this federal money started piling in, Tennessee Tech said, well, we need a liberal arts program. We need an MBA program. And UT said, well, we need an engineering program and we need an architecture program. So now, instead of having universities that focused on one thing and could do it at a reasonable cost, they're now trying to make sure every university can compete in every field with every other university, and that's been the explosion in cost, which has been reflected in the cost to get a degree.
Now, wait a minute. You forgot one thing. They're getting federal funds to put these programs in place.
That's what's fueled all of this.
That's right. Let's take a break. We'll be right back.
You're listening to Backfire with Steve Hickson. We'll be right back after this.
You are listening to WOOP-LP, Cleveland, Tennessee. WOOP FM is a broadcasting service of the Traditional Music Resource Center, and we play America's original music.
Check into cash. The cash you need is closer than you think.
Get an auto title loan today for up to $2,500 at Check Into Cash.
You drive home with the cash in your pocket.
Visit Check Into Cash for an auto title loan today, or get a payday advance for up to $425. Call toll-free 877-262-CASH. Title loan amount determined by value of car and ability to repay. Borrowers often use payday advances over a period of months, which can be expensive. Restrictions apply. See store for details.
Guns, guns, and more guns. That's right, folks. U.S. Money Shops has just received a large shipment of pre-owned Glock 22s, 23s, and the awesome Beretta 8040D Cougar. These guns are law enforcement trade-ins that start at just $379.99 while supplies last. At U.S. Money Shops, there's no shortage of guns, so if you're looking for a great deal on a newer pre-owned gun, then check us out first.
Buy or sell or apply today, the better way at U.S. Money Shops.
Visit usmoneyshops.com for the location nearest you.
Wheeler Technologies has moved. Visit them at their new location at 490 Grove Avenue Southwest next to Bradley Rentals. Same great folks, same great service with a better location to serve you. Call Wheeler Technologies for voice, data, and security needs at 664-TECH. That's 664-8324. And remember, depend on Wheeler Technologies for the current time and temperature every day at 476-1111. Tennessee Alarm Contractor C1750.
If you need a little green, Lending Frog is making deals. He'll lend you cash on any kind of wheels. Borrow just a little
ordinary avenue she can be seen. Tall Betsy is the lady in black. For scaring night owls, she has a knack. Now if you're good and go home early, you won't get it by this gruesome lady. But if you linger till after 10, we want you to know you're a has-been. 'Cause Betsy will tuck you under her arm, and you can bet that's cause for alarm. To Fort Hill Cemetery she will go, to her mausoleum with you in tow. If you don't escape before sunrise, I warn you now you'll be her prize. She'll have you for breakfast, I do not jest. You'll be on the menu, not as her guest. Your bones she'll dump in that old well. At our old school, and no one will tell. Your parents, they'll hurry and fret. They'll search all over for you, I'll bet. So go home early on Halloween night. And November 1st, you'll be all right. Trick-or-treating is so much fun. But if you see tall Betsy, you better run.
Friday. Come one, come all to the Cleveland Speedway. That's right, race fans, are you ready for the thrill of down-home, high-speed, no-hold-back racing? Get ready for the all-new Cleveland Speedway. This Friday's racing comes back to Cleveland. It's time to get your dirt on. An all-new track, an all-new grandstand, and an all-new racing experience. The Cleveland Speedway this Friday. Bring the entire family. Gates open at 6:30. Racing starts at 7:30. If you love dirt track racing, get ready for the all-new Cleveland Speedway. This Friday, racing returns to Cleveland Speedway. Don't miss it. See you this Friday at the Cleveland Speedway. Friday.
You're listening to Backfire with Steve Hickson on Whoop FM. Call 423-614-5553 to join in on the conversation. Now, back to Backfire.
We're back from Backfire. All right, guys. What do you want to talk about this time?
Well, I need to clarify a couple of things I said. First off, when I'm fussing about regulations, I'm fussing about state and federal regulations. The local inspectors is not what I meant. The local inspectors have to deal with all these regulations. We have great people, and on a local level, and Franklin and I agree on a local level about a lot of things. They try to do a good job. It's just the more the government gets involved, the more regulations that the feds pass down, and that's where you talk about unintended consequences. The local guys are the ones that have to try to make this stuff work, and it's very difficult, and they do a good job. So I'm not talking about the local county or city inspectors. I'm talking about the state regs and the federal regs. And also, you know, I mentioned Bank of Cleveland because they're great people, and I'm used to talking to people up there. What I meant with Bank of Cleveland was they run a high-quality conservative bank, and they're careful with their money. But the federal regulators come in, and they don't have that same agenda. Their agenda is a social agenda. And so they go, look, you're not doing this or you're not doing that meets our social criteria. And the Bank of Cleveland's going, look, we lend to everybody if they meet the financial criteria. We're a sound financial institution, and that was my point. The federal regulators made this worse by coming in with social and demographic rules and trying to force local banks to do things based on social agenda, not based on good financial sense and fair financial sense. So that was my point about mentioning that local banks, and not just Bank of Cleveland, all the local banks were made to go, look, you haven't lended enough in this neighborhood. Well, look, we lend in any neighborhood. They just have to meet a reasonable financial criteria, which is what a sound bank ought to be operating on.
All right. We're through with that. Let's get into something else. Miss Rice recently said Turkey would be there to help. What do you think?
Well, Turkey just bombed the Kurds instead of the ISIS people.
Right after she made the announcement, Turkey came and said, no, we didn't.
Right.
How can she say these type of things?
Because they're operating on a political level, not on a diplomacy level.
I mean, how can you say something that you haven't confirmed? I mean, as soon as it came out of her mouth, the Turkey government was saying, we didn't say that. It's amazing to me.
Well, by the way,
what's interesting is how it will affect Turkey's future role and viability as a member of NATO, which is a much more substantial question in the long run for everybody involved, irrespective of what you think about them or not. So they are members of NATO, and in theory, they're supposed to come to our aid and vice versa if our mutual interests are threatened in any significant
But Franklin,
way.
that assumes that they care about NATO. Right now, what
they
he's
do care about being in NATO because it's been a source of stability
Maybe,
for them, and has
depends.
resulted in a whole lot of foreign investment in
but
Turkey.
it also but they've already got that investment. The problem right now is the president of Turkey is basically allowing ISIS to destroy the Kurds, who he has fought against in his own country multiple times. So he's claiming to be our ally, and at the same time sitting back and allowing the Kurds to be massacred.
Well, this is where the whole region gets incredibly complicated in that regard. You know, there have been several reports that have come out. For example, you know, some of the actions that we're taking with ISIS right now, which we all agree we need to take, are clearly, without question, benefiting Assad in Syria.
Absolutely.
Well, we've got two policies at cross purposes there.
Well, the problem
we
is,
want him to go.
If we
That's
had a
problem.
policy 2 years ago and attacked ISIS 2 years ago, and certainly 1 year ago when it started showing up, or actually a year and a half ago when it started showing up in the president's daily briefing, which he didn't read 60% of the time, then we might not be in this situation. And that's been our argument all along with you, Franklin. You'll go, well, what do you want him to do? I want him to do something earlier. He never does anything until he's behind the 8 ball, and that is the consensus among the liberal supporters at this point.
Right,
by the way, the Kurds retook a hill outside, right across the Turkish border, and there were reports of hundreds of decapitated bodies with their eyes gouged out, bodies with their hands and feet cut off. So it's a wonderful group of people, ISIS, that the JV team that we're dealing with here.
Let's talk about, Franklin told me this morning in the news, a second nurse is now from the Texas hospital. It's called Ebola. Yeah. What should we do? I mean, we've talked about closing the borders. They say, no, we shouldn't close the borders. Why shouldn't we close the borders? I think we should close the borders.
Well, let's let Franklin tell us why we shouldn't close the borders.
Close the borders?
To the Ebola-stricken countries.
Well,
Limit travel.
First of all, here's it's a little more complicated than that.
What would it hurt? What would it hurt to do it?
Okay, well, it's something to talk about. But let's understand, there are no direct flights to Africa from the United States of America. Most people don't know that. There are none.
Well,
they all go through other countries.
They've got visas. They've got to have paperwork to get it.
That was Britt Hume's point. All you do is control the visas.
That's right.
I understand, but that's the first thing to know. We don't have direct flights there anyway. They're all coming through other places.
Well, if we put the word out that we're not going to accept them,
well,
until this crisis is over with.
Are you doing the whole? Are you doing the whole continent or just some of the countries?
Some of the countries.
Okay.
You mean like Saudi Arabia's done, like Britain's done, like France has done? Here's the point, Franklin. Tell us why.
I'm not arguing.
All right,
I'm having a serious conversation with you about
Tell
that.
me why the President of the United States, who swears an oath to protect the citizens of the United States, would not try to keep Ebola-stricken residents from those countries from coming to this country. Why would you not do that?
Well, the first answer, I think, will be that he is listening to the purported health experts who are giving him advice about this.
I would assume work for him. They all work for him.
I know they work for him, but presumably everybody works for the president.
Okay.
At some point, you have to have advice, though.
From doctors and stuff like that.
Sure.
He doesn't listen to his military. Why does he not listen to these other people?
You mean the military that we're sending into Ebola-stricken nations?
Yeah.
By the way, there's all kinds of stuff going on here. NBC News has a doctor who's one of their health experts. She's a big friend of Hillary Clinton.
Yeah.
She goes to, I believe,
goes
Liberia
out to a restaurant
and interviews some people, and then comes back and they say, look, you and your entire camera crew, because one of the cameramen has now been diagnosed with Ebola, you all need to be in a voluntary quarantine. She shows up at a bistro in New Jersey because she just can't do without her soup. So this is NBC's health expert, friend of Hillary Clinton, who can't even stay out of her soup kitchen to protect the rest of the country. You've got countries right now, New Zealand has a complete quarantine. New Zealand quarantines any pet coming into their country and holds it and makes sure that all the records are right on them. New Zealand hadn't had an Ebola case right now. The Texas hospital, just so y'all understand how this works, the Texas hospital that treated the Ebola patient, their emergency room is now shut down to any new patients. So imagine, well, in Chattanooga, for example, imagine only 3 cases of Ebola in Chattanooga. And one of them goes to Erlanger, and one of them goes to Memorial, and one of them goes out to, let's say, Erlanger East. And they're treated in those emergency rooms. And they have to shut down those emergency rooms. When you have a car wreck, where do you go? You've just locked down the 3 major emergency rooms in the entire city of Chattanooga.
They're pushing to try to get the guy that's in charge of it out of office right now. That he's not.
Well, he's contradicting himself. He says one thing one day and then comes back the next day and says another. They have no idea. The newest case apparently lived alone in an apartment by himself. Well, how'd he get Ebola?
Yeah.
Well, let me. I'm reading an article right now from Forbes magazine about this travel ban question, and they say that the healthcare experts say that paradoxically, a travel ban would actually increase the risk for spread of the disease.
Where?
Here.
In America.
Yeah.
By allowing people to not come here with Ebola would increase the spread.
Because what it will do is increase the likelihood that people try to travel in other ways other than air traffic.
Well, I don't know, Franklin. If we built the fence down at the Mexican border where a lot of these people are coming across, like Republicans have been saying for, I don't know, a decade or so now, then maybe those people wouldn't be. So in other words, if we don't allow them to legally come, more will illegally come. But your side says illegal immigration is not a problem anyway. It's not even a crime. They're poor victims.
Franklin, look. First of all, I don't claim to be an expert on this issue. However, I'm sitting here. I'm just reading something from a very conservative publication that's going on and on. All these reasons why it's a bad idea and it won't work. Now, am I saying it's right? No, I don't know. I do know that.
Would you
we
feel
don't make
better
policy just because it sounds like a good idea. We ought to look at what the issue really is.
Wait a minute, Franklin. If we wait until we find out about all the issues here, we're going to have
how this president operates. That's why we're in the trouble with ISIS. We waited.
Would you feel
well,
better?
These are experts who are making these recommendations.
Would you feel better, Franklin, if you just knew this disease country was not allowed to come here until we get to the bottom of it? We've got 2 cases that have broke out here in the United States since we allowed it even to come to this country.
Well, all the nations surrounding those nations in Africa have instituted travel bans.
Now, it's already a proven fact that
whatever that means, if you've been to Africa, there's not like a border checkpoint.
I hate to break this to you, but when you got to have an expert tell you that keeping someone with a communicable disease away from other people is a good idea, you got to be crazy. We're not sure whether having sick people around healthy people is a good thing or a bad thing. Well, I don't know. A couple thousand years of human intelligence would tell you different.
I don't know. You tell me why
because this president considers himself This president considers himself a citizen of the world rather than a citizen of this country.
I'm not getting information from the president here. I'm looking at a conservative site that I went to right away.
I hate to break it to you. I've told you this over and over and over again. I don't care what Forbes think. I have a brain. I can think. And if you tell me, do you want to be around Ebola people or not around Ebola people? I choose not around.
Franklin, would you feel more comfortable if they just stopped any of these people from these infested countries from coming here for a period of time until we get our handle around this? Right now, we don't know what to do with the people.
I'm not telling you you're wrong. I am telling you that everybody sitting in this room is virtually totally ignorant about the subject, and we're spouting off opinions about it.
Speak for yourself, Franklin.
I mean, you know anything about Ebola?
I don't need to know anything.
We know something about quarantine.
I don't want to be around it.
Frankly,
I want to quarantine.
We got rid of smallpox by quarantine. That's how we dealt with it.
I mean, there's some common sense that's got to come into play here. Right now,
Wait a minute. So for example,
let me give you some examples. I want to give you an example.
Going over there.
It's
to help do quarantine.
Well, one, we shouldn't be over there. The troops should not be over there, and if you're going to send them over there, for example, Franklin, the CDC that's on top of all of this, the ambulance that carried the first Ebola patient to the hospital continued for 48 hours after that to carry other people. Do you have to be a medical genius to figure that one out?
In Texas, the outfit that the nurse was wearing was nothing but a cotton gown with a mask. It wasn't a proper... It didn't match what they're doing in Atlanta and these other places.
Okay, that's a different question.
Yes,
they need better equipment.
We're not prepared. We're not
Frankly,
prepared.
Did you know that in the mid-1800s, all ships entering New York Harbor were subject to quarantine? For the same reason we were trying to make sure we protected the American continent from diseases that were overseas. Do you know what the greatest protection America has enjoyed for the 225 years we've been in place? It's called the Atlantic and the Pacific Ocean. And this president can't figure out to allow that protection to actually exist.
What are we doing with the nurse's little dog right now?
I don't know what we're doing with the nurse's little dog.
It seems to be an issue.
Well, what happened was the nurse in Spain, they put her dog down, because we don't know whether animals can transmit it or not. So they chose the rather safe than sorry. But listen, I will tell you this. There is encouraging news on the horizon for Ebola. Jesse Jackson has gone to Dallas to meet with the Ebola patient's family because he is sure that there's racial injustice involved in his treatment.
Yeah, I've heard that they're talking about because
Jesse's gone. I'm not making that up.
I know he came with 103 temperature, and the hospital sent him home. So now they're going to come up with a big deal and try to file a lawsuit.
Well, I mean, look, the hospital. If part of the problem is the CDC should have been on this. Ebola's been breaking out on the continent of Africa for months. The president gave a speech over a month ago and said, we're on top of this. Well, the hospital in Texas either didn't get the word, dropped the ball, but they shouldn't have done that. I agree. But personally, I don't think it's racist, although there's a major news organization that said there's implicit racism in the Ebola crisis.
That's a bunch of boom.
So once again, instead of focusing on how do we actually protect American citizens, black, white, red, yellow, whoever, we're worried about social demographics and politics. By the way, the Democrats are now running an ad that the sequester cuts that Republicans pushed through caused the Ebola outbreak.
I'm going to take a call. Go ahead, caller. You're live.
Well, maybe if he gets to Dallas, he'll catch it.
I'm sorry?
Because maybe when he gets to Dallas, he'll catch it, and then we won't have to put up with him no more.
Who you talking about, Franklin or who?
Jesse.
Or Jesse. Yeah, okay. All right, thanks. All right, I want to change the tone here. We talked about that long enough. Is Sergeant Bergdahl, is that his name?
Yep.
What's going on with him?
Well, we won't know because they've completed the investigation, but as part of the course for this administration, the Army is refusing to make the investigation report public.
Until we know there was a congressional hearing led by Republicans who issued a statement saying that they thought that he was going to be released soon.
Released,
and then they were asked a follow-up question, which is why have there been, if this is such a big issue, why there have been no congressional hearings for the last 5 months about it? At which point the congressman who was conducting the investigation said, "Oh, I've got a call. I've got to leave now," and didn't answer that question. Why? Because it was purely politics.
Well, frankly, it may be, but explain why the Army would not release the report.
It's real simple. Why?
Why would you choose the most open and transparent administration in the history of the country? Why would you not let the public see the report?
Well, there's at least one possibility, but it's pure speculation, so I wouldn't claim that I know anything. But there is at least the possibility that Specialist Bergdahl was doing something besides accidentally wandering across the border.
Oh, my gosh. So, in other words, his entire crew, he was super special, super Obama secret agent.
No, I didn't say that. Well, a report wouldn't be issued. That's one possibility. There's something in there we don't want.
Because Obama screwed up. He did this for political reasons, and he doesn't want to be embarrassed again.
What's the political reason?
Because he needed to do something. Oh, look, I care about the troops. He did this for
for
political reasons.
He hugged up to the boy's parents and all this, and now come to find out.
And
the
now
boys
it's burned him. Well, matter of fact, it's burned him ever since he did it.
Yeah.
And now he doesn't want to release the report that the guy, guess what? This guy was a traitor. By the way, Franklin, we had a guy that languished in prison in North Korea for 20 or I think 30-something years. We never did any trades to get him back, and he was a deserter. And when he came back, he was punished. We had one in World War II that we executed. Dwight Eisenhower refused to issue a pardon for him, and we executed him for desertion. This president wouldn't even think about that. He traded 5 terrorists for a deserter, and he doesn't want the public to know.
It does seem
Didn't we all already know that?
Well, we know it.
What do you mean?
We don't know for sure whether he was a deserter.
They were supposed to have had the results from the
because,
investigation.
John, do you actually
August.
remember sitting in here in this studio on these microphones complaining about the president making statements about an area of military discipline before the hearing? Do you remember doing that?
Franklin,
there's going to be a hearing, isn't there?
Let me explain this to you. All of his former platoon mates who aren't in the Army anymore have all testified that he deserted, that he walked out, he left his guns, he left his protective gear, and he left. And he told them he was leaving.
John,
so we know on the record that that's their testimony.
You know there's going to be a trial, right?
No, actually, we don't know that. That's the problem.
We don't know anything.
We don't know what's going to happen.
Well,
There's some speculation that Obama may actually make the call as to whether he's prosecuted or not. And if Obama does that, that will be the first time in history that a president has intervened in this kind of affair.
All right, Franklin, I'm going to change this one more time. The Fort Hood, Texas, the shooter there, his attorney is now saying that his client is jihad. How do you say that? Jihad, and that this was not a workplace violence.
Okay.
Why would his attorney come out and say that right now? You think he's just a bad attorney?
Well, I don't know the answer to that, but contrary to popular belief, sometimes lawyers have to do what their clients tell them to do.
Well, actually, he actually gives a legal explanation. If you'd like, I'll read you the quote. Would you like to hear the quote?
Certainly.
He says, I don't know where they come up with the term workplace violence. I've been in the Army 30 years. I've been in the practice of law for almost 35 years. Workplace violence was not the crime for which he was charged. It was not a punishable offense under the Uniform Code of Military Justice. And it's certainly not an aggregating factor that would warrant the death penalty. Nidal Hasan was charged with mass murder, Gilligan said, adding that the government had the option to charge him with terrorism and didn't. He also argued that it is inconsistent for the Army to pursue the death penalty while attempting to cover the incident with a workplace violence label. Now, that's his lawyer's own words.
Okay.
By the way, the Nidal Hasan, the Fort Hood murder, has now sent a 6-page letter to Pope Francis about waging jihad, further clarifying his intent.
Anyway, I thought there might be some legal things that might.
Well, he is. He's telling you that workplace violence is not even in the Uniform Code of Military Justice. Why would you put a label that's not even a chargeable offense?
I don't see how we get away with.
Because it's political. It's not about justice. It's about the politics of it for Obama.
Well, it's, you say it's political. It is political. Now then, why aren't we doing something about it as Americans?
Well, because we're more interested in who advanced to the next round on The Voice.
Well, anyway, let's talk about how many 53 fundraisers now, and the questions came up how much the Obama administration spent traveling, and they won't give out any answers.
I'm sorry, on what now?
Mr. Obama's been on 53 fundraising events
this year.
Sure.
This year.
Sure.
That's more than one a week.
Anyway, the question came up. It came before them. They want to know how much they've spent in travel. How much it's cost the American taxpayers in cost with Mr. Obama taking these trips. And they're not going to release the information. Is that American?
Oh, it should be released. Okay.
Well, by the way,
but I will say this to you.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't make any difference if it was 2 trips or 52 trips. It's a fundraising trip. Okay? Now, we can take the position that we don't want presidents to do that, and we could even make it illegal for them to do that.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, fine. Let's do that.
Well, I don't think he can just go on a trip because he wants to raise some money for the Democratic Party.
Well, of course he would.
No.
Of course he would.
He's got to tie business
Of course he
into it.
would.
He's got to tie business
And the guy
into
before
it.
him did that.
No,
and the guy before him did that. And the guy before him did that.
You got to tie some kind of
Let me tell you what
flaky
he's talking
business into
about.
it.
If I'm the president and I say I'm going to fly to California for a fundraiser,
that's right.
Then my campaign has to pay for that. But if I say, hey, I'm going to fly to California and I'm going to consult with the governor of California, and while I'm there, I'm going to do a fundraiser, then the taxpayer
John,
gets to
I'm not
pay.
stepping up for that. What I am telling you is this is something president after president after president
This president's
has done
done more than anybody. He's
I
got
don't
the
care.
highest number.
I don't care if he's done it.
Well, here's
what
the other
difference
problem.
does it make
It makes
if
a
it's
huge
52
difference.
or 30?
If
it's a problem to have done it, we ought to say
You're right.
they can't do
but
it.
No, Franklin, here's the real problem. We ought to have a leader with some decency, because right now the world is crumbling around us. And so one of the arguments is some presidents in the past had the decency to go, I'm not going to have a lavish vacation. I'm not going to go on lavish fundraisers while we're having all kinds of problems. They tended to try to do these things when other people in the country were doing well. By the way, the other day, when the second Ebola case was announced, Obama took a 41-second break to have a photo op of him talking on the phone with the CDC before going to his 200th golf round. They actually called the press in to the Oval Office and said, wait, they were all already out on the lawn to go to the golf round. He goes back in, sits down with his windbreaker on for 41 seconds on the phone while they took pictures of him, and then proceeds back out to the helicopter and goes for his 200th round of golf.
My point again.
Do you find that a little insulting?
Sure. Of course I would. You know what else, though? I don't care unless we're going to apply the same standards to everybody.
Actually, we did.
No, we don't. That's the problem,
Franklin,
John. And nobody believes the statement that all these other presidents weren't doing these things.
Well, let me
nobody buys that. We know it's true.
Franklin, let me give you an example of the double standard, okay? Greg Abbott is running for governor in Texas. Greg Abbott is handicapped. A tree fell on him. He's paralyzed.
Not a double standard. That was a ridiculous thing, and that lady shouldn't have done it.
Andrea Mitchell. Now, this is Andrea Mitchell, supposedly a vaulted, journalist, and because we expect our journalists to be even and fair. This is her own statement, fussing about an ad that Wendy Davis has disgustingly run, basically making light of Abbott for being paralyzed. But she said, well, couldn't you have gone after what you see as his hypocrisy by pointing out what he did in that rape case, what he did in these other cases, without the stark image of the empty wheelchair, which seemed to be trying to point people towards his own supposed disability? Now, that's Andrea Mitchell treating everybody as fair, telling a man who's been paralyzed from the waist down for 30 years that it's a supposed disability. So, Franklin, you and your Democrats, couple of suggestions.
What did I just say,
A couple of suggestions. Run on Obamacare, and then have Wendy Davis catch Greg Abbott out in a public event in front of the cameras, dump him out of his fake wheelchair, kick him in the legs until he jumps up and runs off, proving Angela Mitchell's point.
What did I just say, John?
Well, Franklin, that's
what
the double
did
standard.
I just say?
You said she was wrong, but you don't admit that that's an example of the way Republicans are treated versus the way Democrats are treated.
Everybody think about that. We'll see you next week. Bye-bye.
You've been listening to Backfire with Steve Hickson, John Stanberry, and Franklin Chansey. Catch them again on Whoop FM at noon today and every Wednesday morning from 7:30 to 8:30. Now, back to more music on Whoop FM.